All right.
Enthusiasts.
Yeah, this is nice, huh?
Yeah.
Welcome to Nashville. Welcome back to Vanderbilt. You've
Thank
been here
you.
several times.
I have, yeah.
And you essentially just got off a plane.
I did.
Where were you?
Sierra Leone to Freetown, Sierra Leone to Conakry, Guinea, to Paris, Minneapolis, Nashville. That's the route. Katie Krylovitz went through it with me. So.
And you've had about 2 hours sleep after
That's
that
it.
flight.
But I got to meet great students and faculty and employees, so I'm good.
So this is a long way from Florida. You grew up in Florida, is that right?
Oh, that's where this is going. Yes, I did grow up in Florida. In the great metropolis of Weeki Wachee, Spring of Live Mermaids, and Brooksville.
And you grew up on a bus.
As one does, yeah.
As one does. And so when did you know you wanted to be a physician? Was this an early childhood thing, or?
Well, it was, but there's two things going on. One was going through the evolutionary ladder, or up the evolutionary ladder. Like I wanted to be a botanist, a marine biologist, more complexity, a veterinarian, doctor, all this by the age of 10. Needless to say, I didn't know any doctors or veterinarians or marine biologists. I don't know where I got those ideas. But even when I interviewed at medical school, no one asked me happily, why do you want to be a doctor? So I don't ask students that question when they interview either.
Oh, interesting.
It's young to know about your motivations.
Fair to say that you grew up in humble circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, I think materially humble, for sure. But, intact family and parents who both cared about education and had not had... My mother went to school, to college, while I was in med school, and I drove her to her interview, in fact.
Wow.
But she was a grocery store cashier when we were growing up, large family, started young. So materially humble, but not culturally.
So you're famous to all of us. I mean, you filled up this auditorium. I understand you have another famous person in your family, however. Does the Cobra ring a bell to you?
Yes, my brother, the professional wrestler. Now, if you look at my brothers, there you'll probably see the real answer for why I said I wanted to be a doctor. Because engaging in sports with them was a big mistake, even though I was the oldest. In fact, the only time I broke a limb before I became an adult was playing football with my brothers, which I didn't want to do, but my father made me. So that was a handy fracture. And then I could say, no, I want to be a doctor.
Nice. And you went to Duke.
I didn't want to give my brother short shrift because he's a really interesting guy.
I bet. I wanted to do the whole interview about this, but I think the audience wants to hear a little bit about
you. No, he was a pro wrestler for about 10 years. And he's the smallest of my brothers, okay? So you can imagine why I would not want to do sports and would rather have, a microscope or something. They don't. When we go, when he's in Haiti, people will look at us and say, "Same mother, same father." But yes, he is my brother.
So, growing up in Central Florida, you go to Duke for undergrad. Was that a big jump to go to a school like Duke?
Altogether. I mean, it was culturally a big jump, pedagogically. Mm-hmm. It was it was terrific, and I wouldn't have done that either. Now, so any of you students who haven't gone back to your public high schools to say thank you, you should do that because I have. I was it was this guidance counselor at the high school who said, "What do you?" And I was a little bit free-spirited, let's just say, and but she was very patient. And she said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to be a doctor." Again, I'm happy that she didn't say, "Why?" Because then I would have had some bullshit answer, of course.
You're messing up my questions here.
Well, I'm just saying, but I'm heading to a place that I know you'll be happy with as a pedagogue. And she said, "Well, so where do you want to go to school? And I said, well, let's see, University of Florida, Florida State, University of South Florida, the places that you knew of in Central Florida. And she said, well, why don't you think about Duke? And that was it. That was all there was to it. So I'm saying serendipity, happens.
Absolutely.
And, it's not all careful planning.
And you majored in anthropology at Duke.
I majored in biochemistry, and then I took an anthropology class, later taught by the person who would help me switch majors in my last year, who is a colleague of your colleague, T.S. His name's Atwood Gaines. And so that was a last-minute switch because I took a class called medical anthropology, and I said, now that's what I want to do.
Is medical anthropology.
Yeah.
And then Harvard, where you did the combined program, PhD in anthropology and an MD.
Yeah.
And why this combination? I mean, what was it about that attracted you to?
It's sort of when people say, well, when did you decide you wanted to be a physician anthropologist? I said, in a classroom. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't in Haiti. It wasn't in some exotic locale for an American undergrad. It was at Duke. Mm-hmm. And paying attention to reading and being in the class. I think that's why people. Yep. I won't put you in my age group, Ted, but people my age think, gosh, I wish I could go back and do that again. I know that's not what the undergraduates here are thinking, but it has occurred to me.
A lot of times when people think of anthropology and medicine, they think of learning a language or adapting themselves to the customs of a local group. But you've taken it at a different level. You've taken sort of the theory of anthropology and combined it with a theory of public health.
Yeah. Fair enough. I did go through that sort of ritual process, which I think every anthropologist is lucky to do, of learning a language and immersing yourself in everything you can read about one place. And I know you've done it, and I've done it about Haiti. But for example, I spent 10 years in Rwanda, and I knew that I wasn't there to be an anthropologist, but a physician. So the Haitians have this saying, stay in your role, wet no ulu. So my role there was not to try and be a grad student in anthropology again, but to think about, with other people, of course, Rwandans, how do you rebuild a health system or build a health system, a lot of it rebuild and some of it build. And that's a theory of public health in a way, mm-hmm. right? And the theory of anthropology that I learned is very straightforward. If we think we can be culturally competent that easily, that's ridiculous, right? But you can be culturally humble. Mm-hmm. And I'm still learning things in Haiti decades after learning the language and living in a small village and going back and forth to the same place for 35 years. I'm still learning things. So
you speak Haitian Creole. You learned Haitian Creole in Haiti fairly early.
Well, I studied beforehand, I want to admit.
You did study before.
I did.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
We offer Haitian Creole here.
Yeah,
it's
I know.
A new thing. It's, mm-hmm.
I met a historian last night who was telling me about that. I don't know if she's here.
This is a barrier for a lot of physicians who want to get into global health, not speaking a language.
But if you subscribe to the idea that you're culturally incompetent, the chance we could do that is when we're little, when we're not culturally competent, but we're too little to realize that we're culturally incompetent. And then when we're adults, if we fool ourselves into thinking we can be culturally competent. So in other words, the language, I don't speak Russian. I work in Russia. But it is a joy to be able to skip over that step of having an intermediary, right? Mm-hmm. But if you don't know a language, you can always ask for someone to help you interpret. And I think that's better than pretending you know the language.
Absolutely. Yeah. So why Haiti? What attracted you to Haiti?
Those are two different questions.
Okay, why Haiti?
So, again, back for the students to underline serendipity, I'll tell you the true story, right? Because, you spend a lot of time as a young adult, pretending you have everything worked out and you're so smart and clever. That's just not at all true for me. I had met a couple smart and clever people, one of them from Nashville, actually. But that just shows that there aren't that many. But anyone can learn, right? So I don't think of myself as smart and clever, but as a hard worker. By the time I was a senior, I said, okay, now I know I want to be a physician anthropologist. What kind of physician? I don't know. What kind of anthropologist? I think I know, which I didn't, right? I thought I knew, but I didn't. And I know I want to be a doctor for poor people. I did know that. And I don't think it was because I thought of our family as poor, even though, by standard accounting, we were. It wasn't that. But, and so I said, I'm going to apply for a Fulbright to Francophone West Africa. That's another language I spoke. And of course, Francophone West Africa is a completely fake creation. There was never a Francophone West Africa. I didn't know that, right? So it said there was in books, but I guess, if I'd read more critically, I would have known that this was a social fiction of colonialism. And I later did. But the Haitians taught me that. Anyway, so I applied for Fulbright, and I thought, I'm so smart, and I'm so clever, and good looking to boot. And I was a power forward on the Duke basketball team that year. We went to the ACC. Is that what you do? Do you go to the ACC? Anyway, I was not an athlete, but... And my modeling days were numbered even then. But I thought I'll get the Fulbright. And I didn't even get an interview, okay? So Haiti was plan B, but it was a plan B. And that's another thing for students. It's a good idea to have plan B, right? And so I had also applied for, as one does, covering one's bases, I'd applied for plan B and had got some funding from the Department of Anthropology, actually, at Duke. And so best thing that ever happened to me was not getting epic reject from the Fulbright Committee. Thank you, Fulbright Committee.
Silver linings.
Yeah. Well, I knew as soon as I got there. So what attracted me, because I was already attracted to Haiti, was the culture. Of course, I know it's been reclassed as a shithole, but my own experience was just reading about the place, and its culture, its language, its history. I could tell. You read, well, it's not going to be as good as Black Panther, but you read about the Haitian Revolution, and right? Like, that didn't happen in Guatemala. That didn't happen in Honduras. That didn't happen in Jamaica. That didn't happen in Brazil. Didn't happen in the U.S. It's got to be special just by knowing about the history. And then, Haitian art, Haitian culture. And I have a number of friends who are here today who probably feel the same way I did. So it was really the history and culture that drew me there.
So you say you're not especially clever, but you're a hard worker. You also seem to have this moral clarity. Is that something that, did you have a clear vision as an undergraduate or when you were starting your graduate studies of, I want to do something like this and I won't accept compromises?
Well, I think that's probably exactly how I spoke by the time I was graduated from college. But I think that saying I won't accept a moral compromise is probably not really as radical as it seems. It was really later on I started reading liberation theology in college. Reading about Latin America, which again is the lens that I believed was right for Haiti as well. And I think I had that figured out before I went, but whether or not I had it figured out, it was a good lens to look at Haiti as part of Latin America, right? Between Cuba and the Dominican Republic, doesn't get more Latin than that. And yet the depictions in the popular press, as you know, are as if it's completely unmoored from Latin America. So, yes, I was very interested in health and social justice and, the healthcare or lack thereof available to poor people in this country or any other, the United States, for example.
Did you grow up Catholic?
Well, more than any other religion. So not only the hesitation is either yes, I grew up Catholic, or, well, sort of.
But your introduction to liberation theology was in the classroom.
Was in
not
the classroom
church.
and not in the church. So I grew up Catholic in the sense both sides of my family. But my parents were quite secular people. And all their kids would say, so then why are we being forced to go to, we called it Hitler Youth, the Catholic Youth Association. We didn't really mean it. And they would say, my father would say stuff like, because your grandmothers would want you to now shut up and go. So, but Dad, you don't even believe in God. Say, did I tell you to comment anymore? Be quiet. So expert parenting.
You were doing a PhD in anthropology.
Yeah.
You were doing an MD in medicine, and you were flying down to Haiti on the weekends from Boston, from Cambridge.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
Now
that's
that you
not
mention
a normal thing.
Yeah. Well, back before curricular reform at the med school, and I mean Harvard Med School, although it just made me crack up when Harvard students refer to Harvard College as the college. And then I get to say, which one, the College of William and Mary? Anyway, they don't laugh either. But, before curricular reform, basically, Harvard Medical School, the first almost 2 years, they give you something that they call a camel. Why? Because a camel looks like a book put together by a committee. That was the answer at Harvard. And I thought, wow, a camel is lumpy. So it would be a bunch of lectures, only like huge stacks of, like hundreds and hundreds of pages. And then they repeat the same thing in lecture. So I was thinking, having already been bitten by the Haiti bug, hey, wait. If I go to class, I'll socialize and chat with my friends. But if I just go study the camel, I can be wherever I want. Mm-hmm. It was a good plan. It worked for me, but it wouldn't work now because we actually have to be in class because class is interesting.
Yes, we who lecture like that part,
Yeah.
actually. And around this time, you started Partners in Health.
Yeah.
What year was that?
Well, we say 1987 because that was when it was formed legally, which meant that I was 27 and an MD PhD student, wow. And Jim was 27.
That would be Jim Kim.
Yep, and an MD PhD, same program. And Ophelia was 24, and then we had one person, Tom White, who was 60 probably, and he bankrolled a lot of it, as you might imagine, But in Haiti, they were already doing this work before we were. So I think of PIH as started in Haiti by Haitians that I happened to work with.
Mm-hmm. So you were going to Haiti, you were inspired by what you saw there, you came back and with this group started PIH.
But I never stopped being there, as I said, and you said, that was the nature of, I never missed, just in case anyone has me as their clinical physician, I never missed a day of clinical rotations. You couldn't do that, right? You're on call, you start early in the morning, whatever. But the first 2 years were, and grad school too, no offense. Anthropology, which I adore, as you can tell, is, you can get a PhD just by hanging around and talking to people. How hard is that? Oh, okay, sorry. Is Beth Conklin here? Beth, it's just a joke.
So Jim has a fairly high-powered job these days, I understand.
President of the World Bank. I would say that's right up there.
That's pretty impressive that two classmates go on to such storied careers.
Yeah. He's done good.
Yeah.
It's not an easy job.
I bet. The two of you have both argued against sort of the ills of neoliberalism, and some would say that the World Bank is
a paragon
source of that.
Yeah. Well, I think what Jim would do, I don't have to ask, is because it's all in print, the things that he and I have written about the World Bank over the years. And he doesn't, refute those. The question is, since it's a human institution, like this university or any university, like the Vatican, Vanderbilt hasn't been around for 2,000 years, but I have to be careful because my friend, the theologian, is here, and she would say, it's not 2,000, it's 1,600. She believes that everything fell apart starting in the 4th century. But Jim, so the World Bank, like structural adjustment policies, which are sort of neoliberalism incarnate, and they dominated and still dominate a lot of development banks, even academic programs. We were talking about that today on a number of occasions, right?
Absolutely.
These ideas that somebody here, who probably a historian or a sociologist or an anthropologist, should just write about, so what's the connection between neoliberal logic and saying something is not sustainable or not cost effective? Because these are the tools of neoliberalism in a way, and we've adopted them sometimes critically and carefully, and sometimes not so critically and carefully. So I don't think Jim would say, oh no, the bank is suddenly different. But the bank's policies have changed and started to change well before Jim was there, because they invested so much in this idea of structural adjustment, and so did the International Monetary Fund, and so did many other institutions, that it's very hard it's not like the Vatican issues errata either, right? Saying, oh gosh, we were wrong about that for 300 years. Right.
Every once in a while, maybe, right?
Every once in a while, you get a Francis type person.
Fun Paul Farmer fact: he blurbed Pope Francis's last book. That's a pretty big. You can knock that off your bucket list.
Front and back. I told you.
That's impressive, my friend. So going back to this, your big advance, I think, and what has had such an impact on myself and I think most of the audience probably, is saying that somebody who shows up in a clinic in Haiti with AIDS, it's not just about the virus. It's not just about getting antiretrovirals down their throat. There are larger things that result in these particular kinds of people contracting AIDS, structural violence. Would you?
Well, I'm going to elaborate on that, knowing that you want short answers. But I will also say that if that becomes a surprising thing inside a university, to say that, we're in trouble, right? Because it's so obviously true, right? That forces that are beyond the control of an individual living in poverty structure their risk for bad outcomes, right? So racism, gender inequality, oppression of poor people in general, etc. So I don't think of that as in the least bit revolutionary to say. It's simply factual. And one of the problems with focusing on social determinants, in which we get a lot of in universities, including schools of public health, but now in medical schools, is that it is also about getting antiretrovirals down the throat of a patient with AIDS. Indeed, that's the only thing that will save someone with advanced HIV disease. So that tendency to say, hey, this is really, AIDS is caused by poverty, or tuberculosis is caused by poverty, or the list goes on, and then say, therefore, we will only attack poverty and ignore the fact that treatment equity is important, is a huge risk for, I think, liberals, well-meaning people who think they're different from everybody else in the world, and there's a lot of us in the university. If we start ignoring, things like antiretroviral therapy or chemotherapy or dental care or whatever, here or anywhere else, the equity of access, then we're in trouble, I think. And that's a form of structural violence perpetrated by academics, professors, policymakers, and by the way, so we just, we know the we know the treatment for poverty. Well, that's why we critique neoliberalism, because the people who should know the treatment for poverty, that is, development economists, they're the ones who championed neoliberal thinking in development banks. So that just you have two economists in a room, and I'm sure there are two in this room, and ask them about something, and they have completely discrepant answers that are contradictory, and they assert them with the same confidence. That's a problem, And it's a form of structural violence in itself.
So it seems like, and you're talking about equity of care, and using a question that someone in the audience has texted us, a preferential option for the poor, equitable care. The people in Haiti deserve the sort of care that you would give in Cambridge or in Boston. But there's a financial, I mean, is that financially feasible? It's
That's
as
the question.
As an ideal, it's great. As a pragmatic strategy,
I mean, it's a fair question from whoever answered it. And I'm not saying I know the answer to that question, but I do know that anything less than equity of aspiration leads to the troubles that we've been talking about so far. So when someone said this to me today, it could have been you actually, Ted, but when talking about, well, it's not really feasible, is it, or it's not really sustainable, when that becomes a way of stopping the conversation about equity of access to good things, whether that be healthcare, education, a university education in a place like Vanderbilt, then we get in trouble. Mm-hmm. So sure, it's idealistic, but what's wrong with idealism? Sure, it's aspirational. What's wrong with aspirations? We have them on behalf of ourselves and our family members and others we care about. We want only the best, right? Mm-hmm. But how hard is it to try and project that to people who've never had that sort of thing except from their immediate family? And I think it's a better exercise than saying, well, it's not really feasible, or it's, how reasonable is that given the poverty of one place and the wealth of another? But then when you start saying, well, yeah, but the poverty in one place is related to the wealth of another, then that sounds vaguely conspiratorial or outrageous to some people. But, history and political economy are what we're erasing here when we think of everything as frozen. Okay, now stop. Let's stop the musical chairs, and you're a poor country and you're a rich country. And that's not how people in Haiti see it, or people in Liberia or Sierra Leone or Rwanda or South Africa. That's not how they see it. And they're historically more attuned, but also entirely more accurate than history erasers.
And I think even using that category, the poor, sometimes we reduce them to just like basic needs, right? Why would the poor don't have aspirations or desires? We're just trying to meet their basic needs. And as you point out so well, when you see someone in your clinic who is asking you for antiretrovirals, you can't come back and say, give them a structural adjustment explanation. It doesn't
I did
work
say that, didn't I? Today. Did that go over well?
Yes.
I couldn't tell. No, I'm just saying, okay, how can you keep a straight face if you're going between Harvard and Haiti, and you see on one end of that, I mean, again, if you were there, I know I said this not hours ago, but, you have a patient, they're also a person living in poverty, but they're living in poverty in Boston, right? And you have a patient on the other end who's living in poverty in Haiti, and you can make that trip in 3 hours. There used to be direct flights from Boston to Port-au-Prince all the time. How do you say with a straight face, on one end of that trajectory, hey, you've got to take these medicines, and on the other end of the trajectory, sorry, you can't have these medicines, nor should you wish for them. It's just not reasonable. It's not feasible. It's not cost effective. It's not culturally appropriate. I mean, the kind of, it's just intellectually, morally, ethically a joke, right? Mm-hmm. To be able to do that as one person in one day. Mm-hmm. And then that's before talking about the history of Haiti in the United States. Or you try keeping a Boston teaching hospital like the Brigham and Women's Hospital going without Haitians right now. Like when the current administration talks about, sending 50,000 Haitians back, I object on moral grounds, I object on affection grounds, I object on friendship grounds, but also, yeah, you try running the East Coast without Haiti. It's absurd, right? And that's before we even talk about history and political economy. It's just not sustainable to be that person. Mm-hmm. Harvard, Haiti, yes, you take the medicine, yes, you don't. And by the way, since I was a Creole speaker, some of the patients that I was seeing in Boston were Haitian.
Yeah.
So you could even say, on either end of that trajectory, you're begging your Haitian patients to either take them or give that up as an aspiration. And it's the latter that's wrong.
When you started Partners in Health, did you envision what it would become? Did you start off with a big vision of changing the discourse about public health in the UN and the United States? Or
That's called megalomania in psychiatry.
Or did you just want to do this one? Conj was the town where you first.
No, I mean, first of all, I'm just one person, in a complex outfit, as you know, but that has grown even more complex. But I think we always had megalomaniacal aspirations, right? The questions that we argued about were really, how do you do this best? Not, should you try to have high aspirations and change the world? After all, that's what we tell all undergrads. Yep. Right? How special we are, how special. Same in med school, right? Yeah. You can change the world, right? So that is not delusional for people who escaped poverty and ended up at places like Duke and Harvard. Vanderbilt, same thing, right? Yeah. As the Haitians say, if you say, what's the difference between Harvard and Vanderbilt? They'd say, tout blanc semblé. All whites look alike. So anyway, it actually means all foreigners look alike. But it's not derisive. It cracks me up every time they say it, too.
So we do tell our students to have these grand aspirations and to go out and change the world. But then we also tell them all the reasons they can't change the world, right? I've stolen a quote from you that I think you stole from Gustavo Gutierrez, that behind great complexity lies even greater simplicity. Yeah. And to me, that means, there are lots of reasons why we can't supply antiretrovirals to everybody in Haiti, but the simplicity is we should. Yeah.
I think that's right, and I did get that from that quotation from him, but also a lot of great ideas, I think, from the liberation theologians, And, it's sort of, it's let me put it this way. If you have high aspirations on behalf of your own kids or your own self, or like I was thrilled when my mother went to college, right? For her, right? And she aimed high. She only applied to Smith, and she got in, right? But then to say to some woman my mother's age, because my mother was 47 when she went to college, I'm not going to feel good about saying to some lady in rural Haiti, that's absurd for you to want to go to college, And I think we should be very careful about having lower aspirations on behalf of other people in general, but particularly on behalf of other people who've been, to use a scholarly term, shafted. Mm-hmm. And, it's when we start learning that in development seminars or in, it's the simplicity that Gutierrez is talking about is, like you said, well, we should do that, Well, there shouldn't be malnutrition in Highland Guatemala, well, there shouldn't be rampant AIDS in Southern Africa because of labor migration. There are other ways to deal with this than, saying it's not treatable.
The tyranny of low expectations. I know you're a big George W. Bush fan.
Well, I am around PEPFAR.
I know.
And he has fantastic children.
And fantastic children, yes, okay. So Partners in Health now operates not only in Haiti, you expanded into Peru with tuberculosis.
Yeah.
And then you have moved into Africa. You work in 9, 10 countries now?
Well, we have arguments about this. How many countries do we work in? I'm going with 12, but I know there's an official party line. It's been a long time, decades, since I've been the director of Partners in Health. But let me put it this way. This is back to the question of scale, aspirations, change the world. I think that our caution about moving too quickly was not because we had low aspirations, because we had high aspirations. So, and we didn't ever have a vertical program, right? We didn't have an AIDS program. There was no AIDS when we started in Haiti. Or a tuberculosis program. They always started as, okay, open the doors to poor people, which is hard to do in neoliberal settings, right? Meaning, if everything's got user fees, then you're not, that's a great way to keep your hospitals and clinics empty. The other good way being, make sure they deliver poor quality care, they'll be empty, right? Reduces your workday, right? But once you remove the barriers, and the structural barriers, which I would include financial barriers, and you have decent services, they're going to be mobbed all over the world. And so the reason that we're in only 12 countries after 30 years is to try and put in place a comprehensive care delivery system. It's one thing in urban Peru, but quite another in the rural backwaters where we tend to start. There's no electricity, no water, no hospital, no community health workers. So the work involves a lot, as I was saying earlier today, staff, stuff, space, systems. Whereas in Lima, it's as you know, it's a very different situation. There is electricity, there are physicians and nurses, and so it's same in Russia. I mean, we didn't have to build any hospitals in Russia, right? Some people were saying, no, they have way too many hospitals in Russia. And, I understand where that came from. But what they didn't have right then when we started working there was they didn't have all the stuff. And they had the staff and the space, but they didn't have all the stuff. And we helped out with that. Maybe that stuff were laboratory improvements or certain medications, et cetera, et cetera. And so it varies from place to place. In any case, it's been 10 years since my last confession. No, it's been 10 years. I guess I am Catholic. It was 10 years between Rwanda, Malawi, and Lesotho, and then Liberia and Sierra Leone. That's pretty, I think it's careful, and, there's a struggle always between expansionist tendencies, which I clearly have, and expansive tendencies, and then the contractionary ones that say we should shrink. I don't feel that at all. We should only grow.
So another question from the audience, and I'm going to paraphrase slightly. What's the role of PIH as a nonprofit, as a private organization, compared to systematic reform of health systems? Is it replacing national health systems? What's the role, not only of PIH, but organizations?
Yeah. Well, unlike most non-governmental organizations, it isn't at all replacing the role. We only work within the public systems, right? So that can mean, like in Guatemala, that basically means you're not going to be growing very quickly, because at the end of a genocidal spree, we're not going to work with the people that are hosts who some of them don't even speak Spanish, right? In fact, I was so proud of myself for speaking Spanish. Thank you, Peruvian patients. I learned Spanish from patients, which meant that I could say, tell me about the texture of your stool, before I could say, hey, how are you?
It's awkward.
Awkward. Anyway, but I met people who didn't speak Spanish at all. Just like when I went to go to Navajo and you meet people who were born and raised right in this continent and are 90 years old, don't speak English at all. So again, if you've made the kind of structural commitment to strengthening national healthcare systems, you're going to have a lot of setbacks in Latin America. Like you'll have coups, or we did, and they were all over the continent, as you know very well from your work. But and that's why we weren't. I mean, I'd like to think we wouldn't have worked in Rwanda prior to the genocide, right? But we knew when we went to Rwanda that the government was really committed to healthcare and education, to investing a large portion of the public budget in healthcare, education, and gender equity. I mean, that's a pretty clear message, right? that you could potentially have a lot of impact as a small non-governmental organization seeking to strengthen or rebuild public care delivery systems. And it took 15 years to figure that out.
So a byword in public health, global health these days, global development, is sustainability. One way to work in sustainability is to work with local governments. Although I've also heard you question the concept of sustainability.
Well, thank you, because since I did that 3 times today in front of you, that meant you were listening.
Yes, yeah, you're breaking the fourth wall here, Paul.
Sorry. Anthropologists have to. It's called a joking relationship in anthropology.
That's a technical term, Paul.
There are whole books written about it. There really are. Anthropology is awesome. Yeah. The chair of anthropology. Look, any concept. Well, we have a linguistic anthropologist here tonight. I'll probably mangle this, but any concept can be robbed of meaning, right? Like if you say empower too often, you clearly don't mean it, right? Or if you say, let's build cultural resilience, let's have the USAID fund that, or USAID being the main development branch of the United States, it will be robbed of its content, right? And sustainability is one thing in mechanical engineering, right? And quite another one in social affairs of life. Like humans are not sustainable, right?
That's a good point.
Like, I sometimes just want to go to one of these meetings, including academic meetings, and say, hey, you're not sustainable. In fact, I have to admit, I've done it before on a stage. It didn't go very well. But, sustainability, can that concept be abused? And the answer is clearly yes. After all, as I was saying earlier today, and this is one reason I say, don't forget George W. Bush gave us the biggest treatment equity program in human history, right? But against what objection? Not from people living with AIDS, not from poor people. It was from our peers. People went to places like Vanderbilt, Harvard, right, who were policymakers or senior figures in the U.S. government. And the experts, in other words, they're the ones saying, this isn't sustainable, this isn't feasible, this isn't cost effective. And, again, that to me was, well, how do you know whether or not something's cost effective if you don't understand the difference between cost and price? I assumed that since these papers were being written by economists, that they would know a lot more than I could ever know about something. And then, you just ask, so could you show me the primary data, how you decided this isn't cost effective? And you learn very quickly that they're all modeling exercises. But whatever you put into the model, in terms of inputs, determines the answer. So I'm just saying, I don't trust the way these concepts are used against poor people. If it's great in mechanical engineering, like we would like a sustainable bridge that is not going to collapse. We would like, this building to at least stay aloft today. That's not the way it gets used. And I'm interested in the way it gets misused, in my view, in thinking about good things for people living in poverty. Right? Like, let's say grad school, or not dying of AIDS or cancer or obstructed labor. That requires things like blood banks. And again, if you start again every time, wait, we don't need a blood bank here. It's not a priority. It's not feasible. It's not cost effective. It's not sustainable. And it happens every time. So that's why I have a certain, not hostility because I'm such a gentle person, but I have an intellectual hostility towards misuse of those concepts. So they get robbed of social justice. That's not a short answer, sorry.
That's okay. So going back to Haiti, it seems like the popular discourse around Haiti is that it's a hopeless place. Tragedies happen, we put in a lot of resources, we pull out, and another tragedy happens. And it's this kind of discourse plays into public policy.
It sure does. I mean, first of all, I'll make this plug. I mentioned the historian I met last night, and she and another faculty member are teaching classes about Haiti. And I know why she's doing it, and I bet this is why they are both doing it, because Haiti is, from the late 18th century, Haiti is the only place that got it right, with the revolution and the end of slavery. So, I mean, what do you
share
think?
A little bit of the history. The revolution.
It began in 1791, and with the radical idea that we shouldn't have slavery. Okay, now this is 2 years after the French Revolution said we shouldn't have slavery, and then they set out to restore slavery in Haiti and to retake Haiti. Now, they sent 80,000 troops to do that and failed. So that's the Black Panther of the early 19th century, right? Superheroes.
Nice.
The Haitians. Okay, so first of all, not only is Haiti not hopeless, but Haiti has given us messages of hope, unless you believe that slavery was a good thing. Because what did we do in our country, and what did the British do? Right? Well, they banned slavery, but they didn't really. They banned the slave trade, but said slavery's okay. Well, that's for the better part of a century after the 1807 ban, after the Treaty of Ghent, and forget the details, but this is 100 years of hypocrisy, with official hypocrisy, right? Mm-hmm. You ban the slave trade, but not slavery. What do you think is going to happen, right? So, I mean, I think, and that's just one debt, and then I've already told you what drew me to Haiti. But let me just say this thing. You look at all of the turmoil and all the turmoil in Haiti over the last 30, I went there in 1983, so I've seen many coups, 2 very violent ones. I've known more ministers of health than you can shake a stick at, as we say here in Nashville.
That's right.
And even in all of that, if you look at infant mortality, child mortality, maternal mortality, death rates from TB, AIDS, malaria, Haiti keeps going up. Not as quickly as Rwanda, which is the world leader in terms of recovery, right? But in spite of all that, no data suggests Haiti's hopeless. So that's more of a statement about the person saying it. Mm-hmm. Now, I have known some sad moments there, but fortunately they happened after enough time that I understood that they were really more about me rather than hopelessness in Haiti. Mm-hmm. We have to be a little bit more disciplined, I think, especially in a university. When we say someplace is hopeless or a basket, I think it's just a bad start. It's like deeming something good for poor people already not feasible, which I believe we do all the time in this country about poor Americans, particularly people of color. But just doing that, or talking about, some places a basket case, a whole nation as a shithole, a whole continent. Just that can't be true. And, this is not the forum where we should say things like that. I don't think anybody should, but, I think universities least of all. It's just not what universities are for.
I would imagine you've had a lot of patients, you've seen a lot of patients die.
Yeah, I have, unfortunately. And I'm not proud of that because, when you see someone young die, and by the way, right now, everybody's looking quite young to me. But, it's okay if that makes you feel ashamed.
Does it make you feel ashamed?
It does.
It make you?
Yeah.
It touches you emotionally.
Yeah.
You speak about humility more than any physician I know.
That's because of events like that. Mm-hmm. What is more humbling than knowing someone on one end of a trajectory, like the Harvard Haiti trajectory, the Brigham particularly? The Brigham is the hospital where I work in Boston. What's more shameful than knowing that if only we'd had this there, that person wouldn't have died. During the Boston Marathon bombing, please note that anyone who made it to one of Harvard's teaching hospitals survived, right? Think about the earthquake in Haiti. How many patients who died, who I saw die too, shouldn't have died. In other words, you have a crush injury, but you're pulled from the rubble and still die. You know, that is shameful. And it's okay to feel ashamed by that. Because that means that we have to build the kind of infrastructure that won't collapse during an earthquake and make sure that it includes things like proper surgical care.
So to paraphrase another question from the audience and along these same lines, it seems like a lot of our pre-medical education and then our medical education beats humility out of physicians.
I'd say that we also, as physicians and even med students and residents, fellows, that we should also take accountability. Like, why would we let humility be beaten out of us? You can't really take away someone's humility. You know, you take away your own arrogance and your own, because, you know, I personally would put medical students into the category of elites, right? Just like anybody in rural Haiti. Well, I mean, now 30 years afterwards, after, you know, we first went there, and many people here have been there, there are a lot of medical students from Central Haiti. There were none, you know. And, but I'm saying sociologically or in terms of the world, I don't really think it's helpful for me to think of medical students as so powerless that they can have their humility beaten out of them. So just stop having your humility beaten out of you.
And so this actually leads to some other questions along these same lines that we've been getting. What is the root? Is it to having the sort of impact that you've had, for example? Is it remembering the first principles, remembering why you got into this and not getting lost in the jungle of the specifics, or do you have any advice that way?
Well, I have advice, but I would say also, Ted, that if I were so influential, as you say, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? Because that is none of those battles are won yet. I mean, with Ebola, you know, it's just the same thing again and again. It's like, well, it's not reasonable, feasible. We really can't give that kind of care in those places, right? And, you know, as I was saying at noon, you know, when you hear that, you should be suspicious. Like, oh, wait, we can mine diamonds from Sierra Leone with high-end machinery, but we can't put in an IV without getting Ebola? What's wrong with that picture? So either you say, well, that's not the treatment for fluid loss in Sierra Leone, replacement of fluid, you know, but you're supposed to do it orally. Well, what if you're vomiting? Or what if you're 3? Like I said, have you ever tried to order a 3-year-old to do anything?
I have.
So I think first, I've met her. She's here. Your daughter's here on her vacation, helping me today. You've done good, or she done good, in spite of you. No, but I was just saying, first principles are helpful, you know, because if you say, okay, here is the situation in the middle of an earthquake with the whole city, the capital city, in ruins and smelling like death 3 weeks later. You're not saying, I will erase this reality and wish it to be different. You're saying, I acknowledge this reality, but I wish it to be different, right? And then you say, okay, well, we don't have, let me just keep on this jag. All right, so you say, well, yeah, but there's no orthopedic surgeons in Haiti. Well, yeah, but they're right over there about 2 miles offshore on a giant naval ship, right? So, yeah, but how are we going to get them there? Well, how about the helicopter that the U.S. military just lent us? Hey, guys. You know, it's like, but what I'm worried about is not the do-gooder instinct, which needs to be linked to real critical analysis, but I'm worried about well, you know, that's just do-gooder. Well, doing good is good, you know, and the first principles matter, right? And so saying that the chief pathology of all this is believing that some people matter less than you do is not the same thing as saying inequality doesn't exist. In fact, it's the opposite when linked to a plan to attack inequality. And inequality of access to things like healthcare and education are what Partners in Health signed up to attack.
So one thing that Paul does really well is call BS in meetings where they talk about this. When you're in these boardrooms in Geneva or in Paris or in New York at the UN, and people are talking about cost-benefit analysis of providing this kind of care for people in places like Peru and Haiti, it all seems very reasonable at the time. And many of you are going to be in those sorts of circumstances. And it's really important in those circumstances to go back to the sort of first principles. And that's where Paul's example can really be a shining light to us all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a hard struggle for me because I'm actually conflict averse, if you can believe it. So I don't even like doing that. It's not something I signed up for initially. But it's important that it be done. And that's why I'm back here, because I think, that's why I'm a teacher, is because calling bullshit, not rudely or even using a profanity of any sort, but actually knowing when an analysis sounds, wow, that sounds a lot like, and then fill in the blank. But if it's something that sounds like Jim Crow, at least say it to yourself and go figure out either I'm not going to, be in that meeting, or I'm going to find a way of saying, well, you know what, that doesn't sound right, or that erases the history of this problem. And I'm actually conflict averse. Shocker, I know.
It is. You've been so conflictual today. No, I'm
Well, I went to one of the University of Texas's, Texi, whatever, UTESCA in San Antonio. And some kid came up to me, a med student, and said, oh, you're Paul Farmer. And I was just bracing myself for a nice compliment. And I said, yeah, thank you. I just arrived there to give grand rounds at the medical school. And he said, I thought you'd be a grumpy old man. And I said, oh, really? Well, that's an interesting opening conversational gambit. Why? And he said, because I've read your books. I went, yeah, I know, they're grumpy. But I'm not grumpy. I'm conflict averse. It's just the books are because I'm grateful for having a training in anthropology too, because it's been great for me as a physician and as a policy intervener, or whatever the word might be, because it is just like history, it's a re-socializing discipline, right? And that's the way you practice it. Anthropology is a re-socializing discipline.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Paul Farmer, for joining us.
Wait, didn't we just start?
We did just start. Actually, let me ask you, we just had one more question pop up from the audience, so we'll do one last one.
I love nothing more than the sound of my own voice. How could the whole time have gone
A true professor at heart. You've talked a lot about education and Harvard's role at PIH. At the same time, your views often conflict with mainstream academics. What do you see as the role of universities in global health work?
Well, it is interesting to note, however, that for me, academics mean clinical professors. So my views actually don't often conflict with theirs, whether they're surgeons, radiologists. Like, I can't remember ever having an ideological debate with a radiologist. Maybe that would be fruitless anyway. So it's actually not, I wouldn't have a testy exchange with a chemist. We're talking about certain kinds of academics. Yeah. And I think, I'm not saying that medicine is not full of all sorts of, any medical historian would correct me, of course, but I'm saying, if you're at a place like the Brigham and you have an absurd and wonderful number of people take care of a relatively small set of patients, and if someone has a CAT scan of the head, you actually go and talk to the CAT scan of the head radiologist, who's different from the MRI scan of the head radiologist, who's different from the ultrasound of the head radiologist. So the chances for discord are limited, is what I'm saying. And that's perfectly fine. Not so in the social sciences. You know, anthropology, economics, right on down the line. So I may be critical of the way we did our teaching, you know, 30 years ago, although not very critical in the sense of I understand how lucky I was to go there. Now, some would argue that if you could fly to Haiti every weekend, then it's probably not the best medical education in the sense of the way the classrooms were set up, right? Mm-hmm. But, you know, that's not a big problem. We should do better and have, just as you've done at Vanderbilt, to make medical education different and better. You know, that's just given. But I actually think the university is the great repository of. Well, I would just say this is along with the National Institutes of Health and the great universities and colleges too, actually, of America. They are the jewels in our crown, and we have a huge number of great universities and colleges in this country compared to other affluent countries. And it's a great base for the kind of activism that I've been lucky enough to do.
So if you could wave a wand and address something, what would you do? What would you change?
Well, first of all, I want to say that the rate limiting step for our work is still financial, which is kind of nutty, you know, because if you could say, well, if we invest more here in this, we'll actually have less risk of another big Ebola outbreak, but right now we have a ton of it, then the groups doing that work should not always have to beg for every penny, and we do. Okay, so I would wave that wand first. And then I'd wave a wand and say, let's have a world-class university like Vanderbilt in a place like rural Rwanda. Oh, wait, we are doing that. And, you know, so there are a lot of wands that the waving is over many years, right? So the change that I've seen just personally in rural Haiti has been enormous, right? It's not waving a wand, it's like waving and waving and waving and waving. And that's what it's going to be like to build up this university in Rwanda. But, you know, I mean, Harvard was founded in 1636. This is not going to take hundreds of years in Rwanda. We'll do it a lot more quickly, you know.
So briefly, on a personal note, you travel quite a bit, all the time, I would imagine, right? You're between Boston and where right now? Sierra Leone, Rwanda?
Yeah.
Haiti?
Yeah.
You seem to write a book about every 6 months.
No, I wish. Now that's a wand I would wave.
Yeah.
But the fun of the research and writing part, I wouldn't want to lose that.
That's what keeps you good. That's one of the things that keeps you. You also do clinical work, though.
Yes, I do. Clinical work I need just emotionally and psychologically. But I think with my hand, I already said I don't consider myself particularly clever or smart. I know a lot of people who've never been to college are smarter than I am. And so I understand that the reason I'm able to do these things, like write books, is because I got to go to great universities, and they did not even get to go to finish high school. But I think with my hand, so this is another thing anybody can do. I do use a thing you guys call a computer. So I don't actually write anymore with my hand, but I can't work out, like the stuff we're talking about right now, almost all of it I've written about because it clarifies my thinking, and then I can be better at talking about it or teaching about it, right? So if you write a book about well-being, you know, one hopes know a lot more about the concepts and the way they're used after you've written the book. And if I write a book about Ebola in West Africa, you know I'm going to know a lot more and be more confident about sharing that with others after I've written a book.
And the act of writing actually helps one develop these concepts, right?
Absolutely.
It's not like you have this idea in your head and then put it out. Anthropology as well is a discipline of iterations, going out and talking to people, revising your preconceptions.
And that's why I think it's such a cool field. Yeah. That it is all about that, about revision. It gets caught up sometimes in trying to imitate the so-called hard sciences. But at its best, it's about understanding social processes and then describing them to others in writing, which is just kind of cool.
So you went into anthropology to become famous, I assume.
Yes, that was my motivation.
It's worked out. So those of you still looking for a major, you might think of that. Paul, I think you've been a great inspiration to everybody here.
Thanks, Ted.
Thanks
This
so
has been a
much
lot of fun.
for coming and joining us.
Thank you. Thank you all.